Here within the Quantification Workbook, I'll click Project Setup. Let's skip the tutorials for now. We'll be prompted to use a listed catalog or our own from which we will build our work breakdown structure. Let's choose Uniformat. Finally, we'll select the measurement units reported and used. Here we can refine at a property level in the case that the defaults are not appropriate. I'll accept these. Finish and Uniformat structure is imported to the Quantification Workbook, which will allow us to build a detailed quantity takeoff from our model. Here we have the item catalog, and we can browse the work breakdown structure that has been built, the work breakdown structure that exists for us, and see the various groups and items that are part of the catalog. Let me prepare some views which will allow me to easily access the model elements from which I will be deriving quantities. I have some sets here that quickly grab those elements. Before we start mapping elements to the work breakdown structure, let me point out the two sides of the workbook. We are now in the item view, but there's another view, the resource view, in which we can access the resource breakdown structure, which shows the packages of work that are required for different types of construction materials. As we create the estimate, we can imagine how we not only need to know how many or how much of the final product that we have, but we will also need to know how much of each resource or work package that make up that product. In the case of concrete, you'd imagine we'd need formwork, rebar, and concrete at a minimum. I exported in a very simple resource breakdown structure from an XML file, but we can either continue to build that out in Navisworks, or we could have exported a more complete exhaustive RBS from XML. Let's return to that later. Now let's go to the work of assigning model elements to the work breakdown structure in the item view. We'll select our foundation. Within the items tree, I can drill down to find where this would go. Let's say slab on grade. I can also open up the catalog view for the item. This reproduces the item catalog structure and is where I can easily add more groups and items to the item hierarchy tree. With the foundation selected, I can right-click in the selection tree, choose Quantification, and choose Select Corresponding Takeoff Objects. That adds items beneath the selected group in the catalog, selected. It invites me to name it, call it 6-inch slab on grade. And here below in the workbook, we can see the takeoff quantities associated with that, the thickness, area, perimeter, volume, etc. If these fall short and don't show the quantity or the units that are ultimately useful for calculating cost, we can go into the item catalog and adjust or add formulas. Perhaps it makes sense to add a cubic yard quantity, which can easily be achieved by dividing the cubic feet by 27. And here now we have the cubic yards being reported as well. Let's move on to take off some walls. I open the work breakdown structure in the item catalog. let's add the walls as an item, copying and pasting the name into the item catalog. With the workbook open, I can drag and drop directly from the selection tree or the scene view into the workbook space. That took off 69 walls total. All the while I'm getting direct visual feedback from the 3D scene view. Now we can do the same for this other variety of EIFS walls, creating first an item in the catalog, then right-clicking and choosing Takeoff to that item. "17 walls of that type were found and counted." We can easily restructure the item catalog if need be after the fact. We could create a subgroup of exterior walls, EIFS, cutting and pasting the existing EIFS items under this new subgroup. So don't worry how your hierarchy first comes in, because it's very easy to edit at any point in the project. How about doing the same with some interior walls? Let's find their position in the work breakdown structure. Here's a group called partition. I'll add the item, rename it, and finally drag and drop those walls into the workbook. "40 appeared, and here we have a roll-up of all the quantities in the aggregate across those 40 walls. To demonstrate, I could delete one of those walls, and immediately that roll-up dynamically changes to account for that deletion. I'll undo that. I'm going to add a new interior construction item called core walls. I'll select those from the set, right-click and choose Quantification to add them to the work breakdown structure. Columns will place in superstructure as structural frame for flooring. Highlight the catalog item, structural columns, right-click the items to choose Takeoff to structural columns. Again, what if I needed to reclassify those takeoff items? I can simply cut and paste them to a different level in the item catalog. Now on to doors. I have several doors here, which should be filed into the interior doors group of the work breakdown structure. Right-click and take off to a new catalog item. Then I can go in after to name it. Here I see that there are doors of different dimensions or types in this family, some of 2.5 feet and some a bit larger. Let's revisit that resource catalog, where the resource breakdown structure lives. To any of these takeoff items, we can associate resources. From the item catalog, when we have an item selected, we simply click Use Resource, select Existing Master Resource, and it brings up the resource breakdown structure that we saw before. From here, we can add resources. Let's add some 3000 psi concrete and some rebar, and maybe some finished concrete with trowel. And those get added in my item catalog beneath the item. But those same resources get used in my structural columns, so I can easily copy and paste those to my structural columns. What resource might we add to a partition wall? To start with, probably some studs 16-inch on center, and while we're at it, let's copy and paste those to my core walls, which require those same resources, amongst others. Let's examine how that concrete resource is being calculated. I see it doesn't include tons, but I can easily add that as a primary quantity, deriving it from other quantities, in this case, volume. I'll do that with a formula. And there then, that new quantity appears in my workbook. In this way, we have great flexibility about the quantities that will appear for ourselves or other team members downstream. Now there's even a case where some items may simply be missing from our model, but that we know we'll need to have in the takeoff. For this, Navisworks provides us with something called virtual takeoff. The idea is that we add a placeholder in our workbook for that item that's not yet modeled. Let's assume in this case that there are exterior doors on the back side of the building that are missing. 2, in fact, are missing. Click Virtual Takeoff, and I'll create in selected catalog item, and a row appears in the work breakdown structure. Naturally, there aren't any values for the quantities, but at least I account for their existence. There's also a column for a viewpoint associated with that item, a viewpoint that we can also see in the Saved Viewpoints pane. So with those viewpoints, we can go in and associate red lines and comments that can be useful feedback to the modelers about what they need to add into the model. Now let's show how the quantification module helps us with cost reliability. And by that, I mean revealing updates, changes, and omissions in a way that we or the estimator can track them as the model changes. It might be the case that sometimes those changes are valid and other times not. So we really want the opportunity to be able to catch them as they happen and either accept or reject them. In this case, let's simply go back to the Revit model and change the type on 4 walls from one size of that wall to another size. I export out the Revit model again, being careful to override the original NWC file from which we were getting our takeoff quantities. Be careful to go to a complete 3D view so that all the elements get exported. Then back in Navisworks, We'll use this change analysis tool and select Analyze Changes. Let's see that back in the items catalog, we'll get notifications with icons like this. Drilling down into the hierarchy, we see exactly which items changed and also a message of how they changed. Then if we select those items, once we've approved them, we can go to the Update drop-down, choose to update the selected items, and in this way we have flexibility to choose which changes to adopt into our QTO. From the workbook, we can export to Microsoft Excel spreadsheets to get a report useful for downstream workflows, including use in widely used estimating applications. Let's see how the report looks. It comes out with various tabs showing the entire hierarchy, then by resource, and finally by item, and always grouped by our defined work and resource breakdown structures. While there is no automated takeoff in Navisworks quantification, there are very useful features that allow us to perform constructive and destructive quantity takeoff, which in essence allow us to at once perform quantification and a quality check. Constructive takeoff is the process by which we start with an empty scene view showing only the items that have been taken off. For that we use Show Takeoff Items. As such, we can monitor our progress in taking off elements by having a way of filtering out of view those items that are not yet taken off. On the other hand, destructive takeoff is the opposite, in which we start with a full scene view of all of our elements that have not yet been taken off. For that we use Hide Takeoff Items. And this time we are monitoring what is taken off by viewing which items disappear from view. Either method allows us a very clean and systematic way to march through our quantity takeoff and have confidence that we are not missing anything critical.